Sometimes it just comes natural.
Well, welcome back to Counterculture. It's either a laugh or a cough. One of the two, but I was coughing because we were laughing. We were just talking about colossal rudeness. Kind of fits in the story. I'll try really hard to tie it in, unless you talk a lot, and then I don't have to worry about it. So, talk a lot. Are you ready?
That's kind of colossally rude.
That was the whole point. Here we go. We were in 1 Samuel chapter 21. We're talking about the story of David, right? Going to a priest asking for some food, and they didn't have anything but consecrated bread, right? Mm-hmm. And he gives it to them, right? But we talked about, are there times that God wants you to do things on your own where nobody else was around, right? The second question that I have, there hopefully we can get to the third one too, but the second question is this whole idea of consecrated bread, right? This whole idea that it's bread, it's nourishing, but it was set apart for God, right? A part of this counterculture idea, right, is are there things that we should be having now that are consecrated, set apart for God, right? We live in this world where even inside the church world, right, we're throwing things out left and right, right? Going, this isn't as important. What's really important, we hear the word, we hear the phrase, right? Salvific in nature, right? Everything is negotiable because it's not salvific in nature, right? And I feel like in our culture today, we're throwing things out all over the place. Right? But in this counterculture idea, are there things that maybe we should not be so quick about just throwing out? Right? Give you a physical example. My mom and I were having this conversation about their church. They recently had some kind of an animal, don't know what it was, wreak about $31,000 worth of damage in their church. Right? They just got a chunk of money from the insurance agency, not the whole amount, but right, they got a whole part of it, and they're starting to think about their sanctuary. They got to replace the carpet, and while they're replacing the carpet, they got a bunch of pews that are cracked and all kinds of things, right, that are going to need replacing or need some work. And we were talking about the whole idea of going to chairs, right, and this whole idea that chairs and pews are not salvific in nature in your church. You might be able to get there, but they're not, right? But she's under the opinion, like, listen, lots of churches are quickly throwing out this whole thing. They're just getting rid of their pews, going to chairs, and we're looking at the whole thing and saying, like, is there a reason to keep our pews type of thing? Like, is there a reason to kind of be counter culture in nature, right? So, Pastor Mark, are there things that maybe we should not be so quick to just throw out?
Yes. We do not throw out the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
We do not throw out the Spirit,
mm-hmm.
though there are some churches that are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's my third question. So
I think if we were to talk to the people in Lahaina, Maui, they would who have lost everything. They would remind us. It's stuff at the end of the day,
right?
And we are reminded every time we go to a funeral
mm-hmm.
that you don't get to take your stuff with you. There's no U-Hauls behind a car. It is amazing to me how many. I remember in a board meeting one time, and it was the idea was thrown out. Maybe we need to get rid of the pews and we need to go to chairs. And there sat a board member. We can't do that. And I looked at him. I said, "Why?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, I like them. Okay, wait. You liking them is not a sufficient answer, a reason to not get rid of them. Now, here's the interesting thing. We can start throwing things away that don't necessarily need to be thrown away. I have a nephew who's the minister of music, the worship leader, whatever you want to call it, at an old stone church that has wooden pews with no pads on them. And they do, I think, 2 or 3 services a weekend. The church is growing, and it's not about the pews. People don't care about that.
No.
And so, I've had people, we got to get rid of those pews, or those old hymns. They don't say anything. Well, then you're pretty shallow in your spirituality if you do not think the old hymns say anything to us, because we can listen to those hymns, and there's deep theology in them. Some of it I don't agree with sometimes, but and it's just wording. But I mean, there's things that we have to say. What is important in my denomination? We have these things called altars, and they're a place where people pray. Now, I have seen altars where they have put the Christmas flowers or the Easter flowers, line them up on the altar, and they the water's bled through, and there's things. That's not what they're there for.
Right.
Now, am I making an idol out of them? No, but I am saying these are sacred. This is a place where we meet God. The communion table, some people think that's just for decorations, to put fancy flowers on and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we need to remember what it's there for. In my church, we have the Bible open, the Word, and then we have a communion chalice and plate there, the Word and table. And there's a Christ candle on there. We have a runner, that's it. And I'm not against putting flowers on there. I think it can be, but when the flowers become the main thing, it's centered in our church. The pulpit is centered. And it's there for a reason. It's for didactic purposes of saying these are central to our faith. A pew is not central to my faith.
Right.
That is a place for me to sit down so I can worship. And they used to stand for worship when, what was it, Ezra or Nehemiah? Nehemiah read the word. Whichever one of them read the word, I can't remember. People stood, and it did not. And now it wasn't the whole Bible. I'm not suggesting that. But I still ask people to stand in the honor of reading God's word. There are some things I think that we need to say. What is a sacred cow? And there's some sacred cows that need to be butchered. We're going to do something a little bit different in my church this year. We're not having our harvest dinner on a Sunday after church. We're having on a Saturday, and several weeks before we normally have it.
Make it totally.
And I joked, maybe someone's watching, but they go, "Why are we changing it?" I said, "Why wouldn't we? What difference does it make when we have it?" Okay, yeah. So we talked about it, and about here's some reasons we were thinking about doing it. Sometimes we have to question why we do what we do. So it's the old story about why the cutting off the ends of the ham.
Yeah. Why
do it? Well, my mother did it. Why did your mother do it? Because my mother did it. Well, why did you do it? Because the ham it didn't fit in the pan. So I thought you did it. No. How about you ask? Why do we do the things we do? And they have meaning if we will look into those meanings.
Is it possible? I love what you just said. I'm literally, truly, I think that's probably the first time in all of my 52 years of life that I have heard the podium is in the middle to represent central, right? This is at the center.
Centrality, but yeah.
Right? I think that's crazy because in a lot of churches you have pulpits on one side or the other side or both sides, and that kind of thing.
And I don't know there's any historical, it's for me personally.
Right. So it
says this is central.
And I love that idea. But is it possible that for some churches would get rid of their communion table because it doesn't mean any of the things that you just said?
Yeah,
right?
Some have.
So for our church, deciding, does this have meaning? Is there a purpose for why we do it this way? Is important, right? And that might go counterculture. Keeping the pews might be totally counterculture from what another church would do, but the reasoning, I love your whole thing about the altars. I grew up in a church that had the altars. Every kid knew, you didn't go sit on them, you didn't do things on them, because this is where people met Jesus. And every Sunday, you were invited to come meet Jesus there, right? This is a big deal. That didn't mean you couldn't meet him in your pew. It didn't mean you couldn't meet him anywhere else. But you were invited and they were treated that way.
Yes.
Right? So
sacred space.
Right. So now I go to that church, they're gone. They're not there. They took them down, right? And so you're left with, that was important back then. So either somehow it became unimportant, right?
Or we didn't share why we cut the ends of the ham off.
Exactly, we didn't know, which I think is some of the reasons. So sometimes the counterculture part of this is, hey, we need to know what's important to us, right?
Well, and I started ministry at the beginning of the church growth movement.
Yeah.
And I remember it's all everything's seeker sensitive. Well, if they're seeking God, then why are we, giving them something other than God? Let's give them God, which is today, as I do research and I see stuff, people are coming to church because they're looking for something different than the world. So what do we do is, and so we said, well, we can't sing hymns. We got to sing music that will appeal to them.
Yep.
Okay, so but one of the things that I'm also understanding from some of my research and findings these days is that people are coming to church because they're looking for something different than what they're getting in the world.
Yep.
If I wanted to hear a rock concert, I'd go to a rock concert. I'm coming because I want something different that is going to appeal to me.
We're so afraid to be
Give me
different.
God. Give me God.
So let me go full circle, go back to the colossal root thing, right? Is it possible that when we talk about this area, right, we talk about other things that we shouldn't get rid of, that should be sacred stuff. Is it possible that there are things that to one person, this would be colossally rude if you did this? And then to another person, it would be like, no, it wouldn't. It doesn't bother me. Like, it wouldn't be that way at all. We're not seeing it like that. So is it possible that in our churches today, we have people who are like, hey, getting rid of the pews would be colossal. And for some people, getting rid of the pews would be the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, it's the problem when we start putting people's names on things. You know, so you see, it's hymnals that have, you know, in memory dedicated to someone, and it's like, well, we can't. Well, but they're falling apart. Yeah, but that was for Aunt Susie. What was 300 years ago? Well, we can't use it anymore. Okay, well, let's put it in a glass case, which is fine. I love history. I love going to churches.
Maybe we should have a church
And
museum
seeing
around
that stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like, have we lost sight? It reminds me of the movie, A Man Called Peter. It was about Peter Marshall, the first chaplain of the Senate, I believe it was. And World War II is breaking out, and he marries a couple, and he lets them have just an hour or two before he ships off for war. Not to consummate their marriage, but to just have a few moments before he goes. And it's I think it's the Lincoln Room. And in walks Miss Hoity-Toity, the boss of the church, you know, and she walks in and sees them in there, and they're just holding each other and they're kissing or something. She just throws a fit, and Peter Marshall goes off on her in his office. He goes, they had an hour before he shipped out, and they may not ever see each other again. You know, and she needed a little bit of dirt thrown on her to say that. Are there some things that are so sacred, but they're the wrong things that are sacred?
Well, why would something be colossally rude to us is important, right? That we're able to.
Why is this so important?
Right.
To you?
Why is
if it has meaning to you, that is one thing.
But listening to each other, listening to people rather than just be like, I'm anti-pews and I'm pews, right? But listening to somebody, because what you just said, like, again, if I have a family history in a church, and this hymnal's been in this church 300 years, and it's dedicated for my family, it's going to matter. It's just going to matter to me. Should it matter to me? Probably not, but it's going to, because it's part of my... So if we we need to understand that rather than just poo-poo it and throw it away. Say, like, I understand why this would be colossally rude to you, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to still do it.
You need to take a look. You do a little deep dive about why is this bothering you so much.
Right. If we feel like this is...
So you get someone like me, who I don't mind change.
Right.
I look for things to be different. And that can be a huge issue for someone who... So I used to do some work with some training with the DISC, not officially. I wasn't ever, but I'd train with it and stuff. And I love that stuff, Myers-Briggs and all that stuff. And I remember I would say to people, this isn't just for your self-information, so you know yourself a little bit better. It's also so that you can recognize these things in other people and say, wait a minute here. So, I've been in situations where I realize, okay, this is a person who wants a lot of details. And if I don't have them up front, they're going to be asking me questions, which drives me crazy. So what do? I don't change who I am, but I say, okay, this person needs a lot of information, so I'm going to give them a lot of information. Then there's another person over here who doesn't want to know how I feel about something. They just want the facts. So I'm not going to tell you how I feel about it. I'm just going to, here's what's going on.
See, I need to get better at that.
And, and so in the church, that's one of the dances that we have as pastors, is I need to understand the people who are slow to change. I got to sow the seed ahead of time. So they can sit with it and say, okay, this could be changing.
I need to blunt my sword a little bit, is what I
heard
yesterday.
Before you run it through a barrel.
Before I put people in a barrel because they want. Beautiful. Well, hey, listen, let's leave it there. Maybe I'll get to my third question at some point. We'll see.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good.
We'll see you next
Grace
time.
and peace.
Counterculture.